So some intro ecology notes tied to what we've been working on this week. You had a bell ringer question related to Minnesota biomes and what makes a deciduous forest exist here rather than northern Minnesota or western Minnesota. And the answer is climate. What determines where major biomes of the earth are located? Climate. What is the difference between weather and climate? Important to understand this. If you look outside and it's raining, that's weather. Whatever the local atmospheric conditions are at a particular place in a particular time, that is weather. So that's what we are experiencing on a daily, sometimes hourly basis in Minnesota. Climate, on the other hand, is the long-term average. It's 30 years of weather data averaged out to find patterns for any given area. So you would look outside, you'd decide on the weather to determine what you wear on a given day, but you would use climate to determine what clothes you have at your home in your closet. So what variables factor into defining weather and or climate? So what is it that we think about in terms of weather and climate? Temperature and precipitation are the two biggies that we pay attention to because they have the biggest impact when it comes to maintaining biomes and allowing certain crops to grow and when to plant them certain times of the year, amount of precipitation and temperature. This is what's called a climatograph, or climate graph, and you'll need to know how to interpret one of these. But what it shows you is the average temperature and precipitation, and the line graph shows temperature, and the scale for that is over here in Celsius. Precipitation over on this scale would be the bars. And so you can see the months of the year, and the warmest months of the year get the most precipitation and the highest temperature. So this is a northern hemisphere location. But we can also include humidity, wind, cloud cover, degree of sun, high or low barometric pressure, etc. There are other things that go into talking about weather and climate, but temp and precipitation are the major players we want to consider. So what about climate patterns generally around the world? Why is it that Minnesota has such a drastic climate difference compared to Hawaii or San Diego, California? So we want to understand that. Well, part of it is the fact that Earth is a sphere, and solar energy hitting a sphere is going to give most direct solar energy where it's hitting on the flattest angle. But if it's at a longer angle around the poles, it's going to give less direct energy. So the fact that we have a spherical planet, it tilts and rotates on its axis. The orbit around the sun of the Earth is an ellipse. It is not a circle, and so different times of the year get different amounts of solar energy. The Earth also has white spots where there's snow and ice permanently, at least permanent from a human timeline perspective. And so snow and ice is a measure of albedo, how light the surface is for reflecting solar energy. The more albedo, the more solar energy reflects, the cooler our planet is. Ocean currents also have a huge impact on local climates. For example, England is further north, closer to the poles, closer to the North Pole than New York. But it has a milder climate than New York because it is getting the Gulf Stream current, which is carrying warm equatorial water along the coast of Europe, along the coast of England. So we'll have a milder climate because it's getting all of that heat carried by ocean currents. And of course, air circulation and the jet stream is also another player. So we have westerlies, for example, that you might learn about in earth science. And we have something called the jet stream, which sometimes stretches down over Minnesota in the middle of winter, and we have major cold spells. So those are definitely factors into our climate. And then local geography. Geography like mountains can create things like rain shadows, so making one side of the state dry while the other is a little more wet with precipitation. And of course, we can't forget greenhouse gas concentration. And those would be gases like carbon dioxide. Water is actually a greenhouse gas. We could talk about nitrous oxides. We could talk about methane. So there are a number of different greenhouse gases, but the most measurable and easy to follow is carbon dioxide, which stays in the atmosphere for up to 100 years before it degrades. So climate determiner visuals. Again, scroll through these as you would like to understand those climate determinants that were listed and try to understand why climate is variable on the planet. The tilt of the axis, the ellipse of the spherical nature of Earth. This is looking at albedo, more solar energy reflected on the white surfaces. This is looking at the different major ocean currents on Earth. This is looking at major wind patterns on Earth, trade winds, etc. This is local geography, like the rain shadow I was mentioning, and the greenhouse effect. It should be noted that the greenhouse effect actually is vital to survival of life on Earth. Without the greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases warming the planet to a certain amount, Earth would be a frozen sphere. If we didn't have greenhouse gases, Earth would be uninhabitable. It would be too cold. But we want it just right. Right now, with added greenhouse gases, we are shifting the warmth of the planet, which is destabilizing climate. And that is what is a problem with climate change. The destabilization of climate means we can't predictably grow food for our population. That is the number one potential threat globally, is food security being hindered by unpredictable weather due to climate change. Sea level rise is another for anyone on a coastal situation. So we have to have the greenhouse effect for life on Earth. We just don't want it enhanced. All right, what are the major biomes of Minnesota? Coniferous forest, prairie grassland, deciduous forest. They're kind of mapped out here on this colorful look at Minnesota. This is the one from the DNR. They include the tall grass aspen parkland, which is kind of a combo biome because it's got some grassland, but it's also got some trees. It's sort of a mix. It's closer to what a savanna would be like. All right, so why are the three major biomes of Minnesota located where they are? Well, for the coldest biome further north, and pretty low precipitation much of the year because it gets locked in frozen snow, you're going to have a coniferous forest. If you have the driest most biome, not enough moisture annually to support trees, you're going to have prairie grassland. So the driest of our biomes in Minnesota is the prairie grassland. The warmest and the one with the most precipitation annually is going to be our deciduous forest. Okay, so what is typical of these three biomes? What characteristics do they have? So hot, humid summers, cold, snowy winters, cone-bearing trees with needle-like leaves to reduce water loss. Examples: pine, spruce, fir, cedar. They might have deer, moose, wolves, snowshoe hare, bobcat, black bear, porcupine, chipmunks, beaver, a variety of birds, and the wolverine. All might be part of the coniferous forest, also known as the taiga. This is a visual of our coniferous forest. If you haven't been to the Boundary Waters, I suggest checking it out because it's spectacular. If you have a biome with 4 distinct seasons, humid summers, cold, snowy winters, but the plants there have broad leaves and they're trees, and those leaves come off in the fall to reduce water loss, you're looking at maple, basswood, oak, elm, ash, and cottonwood as typical plants here. Typical animals listed here. You're looking at the deciduous forest biome. And a visual. You got the 4 distinct seasons. And finally, lower precipitation than forest biomes, covered with grasses, forbs, and herbs. These plants grow, the growing part is near the ground, and they can regrow from roots. They need fire to be maintained, and up to 2/3 of the plant is underground. Without fire, the shrubs can start taking over. Typical animals: bison, domesticated livestock, now pronghorn antelope, mice, fox, coyotes, quail, prairie chicken, pheasants. Typical of the prairie, aka temperate grasslands. Some visual. That's a pronghorn antelope. That's a prairie chicken. Big blue stem growing, the tall grass. And then you can see some of the forbs growing in this picture up on the right. So that is a snapshot look at Minnesota biomes and a little bit on